Do I have to admit people now? Let me see. All right, we're going to be starting very soon. All right, so let's get started. I hope you are geared up for another exciting core module called commercial negotiation. And I'll be taking you through this whole program. My name is Charles Kalima. I do hope that we're going to have fun together. Like I usually do, I'm going to divide you into groups. Again, you will be required to do a group assignment, which requires you to interact with your colleagues. Let me know if you can hear me well, and if you cannot, please just raise your hand. If you can hear me, you can keep it mute. But I'd like you, wherever you are, to be in a place where you can concentrate. I do hope that you're not doing other things as we are going through the lecture, because then you have divided attention. That is not going to help you much. All right, so let me share my screen with you and then we can get started. All right, here we go. So like I said, the module is entitled Commercial Negotiation, L4M5. And the topic we are going to be dealing with today is we will be analyzing the application of commercial negotiation in the work of procurement. All right, so let me just make sure that that is it. Yes, so under that we'll be defining the term commercial negotiation. Then I'll talk to you about negotiation in relation to the stages of the whole sourcing. I would actually call the whole procurement process. We'll take a bit of time to go through that. And then we're going to look at the sources of conflict that can arise in the work of procurement and supply. Why is there a why do we talk about conflict in negotiation? It's because negotiations done when people are standing at different stages, or they're at a different stage of understanding. Each person has got a particular frame of mind or way of thinking or expectation, and the other has got different ways of expecting things. And each one in their own right is right per se with the view that they hold. Now, for you to negotiate, you have to move towards a goal where you agree to work together. And that requires you to give away some of the things that you are holding dear to and take other ideas from the other party in the negotiation. And sometimes to give away a position will cause conflict. People will not easily give away a position that they're holding. So it is very important in negotiations to know how to deal with conflict. So we'll spend some time on that. Then we will look at team management and the influence of stakeholders in negotiations. So that is what we're going to cover today. All right, so I hope you are ready for it. Like I said, anytime, raise your hand if you want to talk. We're going to have an exciting journey together. So let's look at the introduction. So you'll find commercial negotiation widely utilized in different areas, okay? So commercial negotiation will incorporate different types of elements, and in fact, you will need different expertise in order for you to arrive at a particular agreement depending on the complexity of the project that you are negotiating. So the first one is cost accounting. Why do you need cost accountants? Later on, we'll talk in detail about the requirement of cost accounting for negotiations, because the bulk of what you negotiate mainly is the costing of the product, all right? And of course, you will need people who understand cost accounting. They know the present value of money, the future value of money, They're able to tell you what risk associated with particular currencies, especially if you're dealing in foreign currencies and so on. You'll have to have a certain level of understanding of economics. So we will talk a bit about economics in this subject. Of course, mathematics is important. You need to know how to divide, how to convert rand to dollar, dollar to rand, and know which one must be the denominator, which must be the numerator, and so on. And then psychology, you have to understand the psychology of people. So we will talk about that. Then organizational behavior, communication is very important. And then politics as well. You must understand the politics behind certain products. Some of you, one day you'll be involved in politically charged projects where you'll be required to negotiate. And we're talking about the commercial negotiation. We're not talking about union and things like that. This is commercial negotiations. If you are called to negotiate a deal for, and you work probably for the Department of Energy, and you are responsible for the sourcing of nuclear, that is highly politically charged. You have to understand those elements. Then sales, and of course, procurement, which we all do understand. Okay. And then just as a matter of continuing with the introduction, so commercial negotiation is not always an option. It's not always that you get involved in commercial negotiation. There may be some restrictions as to what can be negotiated in procurement. When you work for the state, there are certain levels of procurement where you are only required to consider price and BEE, and you award the contract, depending on how complex the item is. We'll talk about that as we go along. The World Bank, for example, in World Bank terms, you have to pre-qualify suppliers. You take suppliers through a stage of pre-qualification where they demonstrate to you that they're able to do perform a project based on the technical criteria. Once they go to that stage, you pre-qualify them, then you send them a request for quotation, and then you do not negotiate with those guys. Whoever gives you the cheapest price wins the bid. So if you get familiar with World Bank procurement practices, you will know that this is how they operate. The other reason is that negotiation is not always free. That is why you may not need to negotiate. You need to calculate the value, cost benefit of the negotiation. If it's a small transaction, you don't need to call in people from overseas to come in, or from wherever they are to come in and waste time on negotiating. You may just go ahead and award whoever is the cheapest. So that's a broad introduction. Let's dive in chapter number 1, which is analyzing the application of commercial negotiation in the work of procurement and supply. To start with, let's look at a couple of definitions of negotiation. It is important for you to understand this, all right? There are a couple of definitions, and some of them based on Oxford's. Apologies about that. So let's carry on. So some of the couple of definitions of negotiation, according to the Oxford Living Dictionary, they say it's a discussion aimed at reaching an agreement, which is to confer with another as to arrive at a settlement of some matter. This is a Merriam-Webster, or to communicate with the objective of reaching an agreement by means, where appropriate, of compromise. Compromise is one approach of negotiation, which we'll talk about in chapter 1.2 next week when I meet you, but it is not usually used in the commercial negotiation. And it's a process through which parties move from their initial divergent positions to a point where agreement may be reached. Now, if you look at the word divergent, divergent means that you are both or all, because the negotiation there could be two or more parties to a negotiated agreement. You may be divergent in your positions, and those divergent views are totally different from each other. And that is the basis for the source of conflict, because everybody thinks that they are right in their own right, like I said. So you need to move to a point where you reach an agreement. Negotiation is a process by which we search for terms to obtain what we want from someone who wants something from us. Okay, so and you find that although we will not talk about live negotiations, you'll find that in most of relationships, and remember that a supplier-buyer kind of engagement is called a relationship. And ordinarily in all relationships, there has to be negotiation. And every time you enter into a relationship, you need to be able to give up something to get another thing, which is more important for the mutual benefit of the two parties. All right. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Professor Gavin Kennedy highlights that we need to distinguish negotiation from other forms of decision making. So there are various decision making processes that are available to an individual. One of them is called persuasion, where you appeal to the needs, goals, and interests of the other party. Usually, when some of these are one-sided. When you're just trying to persuade somebody, you are trying to get them to see the needs and goals that are important to them. You can't persuade somebody if you do not make them see the benefit of what you're trying to persuade them. Then one which is used in the army is called command decisions. It is one directional, where the army officer, senior general, tells the subordinate, you shall do this, or a group of subordinates, thou shalt do this, and they do it. There's no negotiation involved there. Instruction, where you give a directive to your subordinates in order for them to do something. There is no negotiation. Then there's something called litigation, which is normally used in a court of law for a legal action to force another party to comply to a certain demand or to restore the balance of justice. Now, this is normally done by the courts of law, and in South Africa, we call it an interdict. And then there is something called coercion, where force is used to get another party to comply to a demand that is on the table. Now, all these are not negotiations per se, but some of these can be used in the process of negotiation to clarify a point or to get the other party to do some things, and we'll talk about those a little later. So negotiation, on the other hand, involves two or more parties in discussion aiming at reaching an agreement or settlement of an issue or issues. This is the commercial definition of negotiation, if you were to be asked. So remember, we've talked about others previously in the previous slide about the English dictionary, about other people's views of what negotiation is. When you were asked in a negotiation question in the exam, for example, you have to choose this one that talks about the involvement of two or more parties in discussion aiming at reaching an agreement or settlement of an issue. So it involves cooperation or parties that have shared interests and some interests that are divergent. That is a given. Not everything that you will negotiate is going to be divergent. Some of them are shared interests. In the process of negotiation, value is exchanged and both parties will have their needs sufficiently satisfied so as to arrive at a mutually agreeable settlement. Remember, sufficiently satisfied. Now, when we talk about sufficiently satisfying of the needs of both parties, it becomes very important for a buyer or a negotiating party to understand how to get the other party know that their point of view will sufficiently satisfy their need. There might be, initially when we started, we had divergent views, but when we get together, ultimately, we need to come to an agreement that what we are doing will totally satisfy everybody else's need. Although both parties may not be equally satisfied, they will be sufficiently satisfied. Two different things. The agreement must be one that both can sign off. Now, here is the point. I'm going to preempt something that I'll talk to you about later on towards the end of the module. If you know that in a negotiation outcome, the other party, you have really won big. The other party goes away with thinking that they've got a great deal, but you know at the back of your mind that your deal is far better than theirs. You do not go about bragging about the deal that you have received, because the moment the other party hears about it, they will go all guns blazing, trying to remedy their loss, or their in Chinese they call it loss of face, because if you publicize it, how great a deal you got from a negotiation, and the other party eventually sees that after all what they went away with was a very small deal, satisfaction of the deal, then they might lose face, and eventually they might start doing certain things in the running of the contract to frustrate you as well. So keep the success to yourself. Don't ring the bell and pop the champagne once you finish negotiating if you got a heck of a good deal. All right? Let's carry on. There are two concepts that I want to introduce to you that you must master in the context of negotiating. So the first one is firstly the content of negotiating, and the second one is the process of negotiating. Now, the content of negotiating is about what you are negotiating about, and this is typical of the intricacy of the product you are negotiating. For example, if you are negotiating for the procurement of laptops, all right, the content there is talking about the actual knowledge of laptop procurement, or ICT, information communication and technology procurement, and it is unique to each negotiation. So the content is unique to each negotiation. However, the process is how the negotiation is managed. How do you manage the negotiation? You have generic stages of negotiations that you have to go through, whether you are negotiating laptops or you are negotiating big things like stationery or catering services or something like that. The important point to understand here is that detailed technical know-how is not always essential from a procurement perspective. If you have been thrown in as a procurement person to go and negotiate laptops, you don't have to be the guru at laptop manufacturing or whatever, how laptops work. You can always bring in a product specialist to assist you. But what you have to master is the process. You are the custodian of the process. Procurement staff must display a core skill in the negotiation area, and some people have a natural ability, but it can all be learned. What we are teaching you in this course is the process part of the negotiation side. Some of you, because you've got a background of IT, others have a background of accounting, you will know how to negotiate financial things. That's the content of how to negotiate that part of the negotiation process. But you are expected as procurement to understand the whole process, how the process starts and how it ends. You are the custodian of that, okay? The next one is negotiation in relation to the stages of sourcing. Now, this is very important because in the exam, sometimes they will ask you a question that says, what are the negotiation approaches you would use when you are negotiating the stage of identification of need, for example, okay? I've got all of them in the cycle, or asset management, or contract development, and so on. You will find that negotiation skills are most likely applied in each of those stages of the procurement process. Now, remember that the different stages of the procurement process are not all interacting with the supplier. Some of them are interacting with your internal customers. So you have to know how to negotiate, for example, with the end user. When the end user is formulating a business case, or they are formulating a specification or a request for procurement, you have to apply negotiation approaches. So let's get started with the understanding of the need and developing high-level specs. What are the different negotiation requirements required for these stages? Number one, when you are negotiating for the understanding of need and developing high-level specification, this is the stage where the PR is either put in the system, and then you do the high-level specifications. You do the specifications for the product. So this step involves mainly internal negotiation with your stakeholders. Great opportunities for cost reduction is here. This is where you do not allow the end user to specify an item that is unique to one particular supplier. You understand, guys? So it's very, very important. So negotiate the target price with a budget holder so that the price does not go beyond what the company can afford. The next one is that under the market, commodity, and option research, including make or buy assessment, this step informs the negotiation process because you decide which market you will approach. Okay, I've put, for example, low-cost country sourcing is one where you can negotiate with the end user, where you, or the adjudication team that are looking at the commodity, so that you can put into the strategy that follows that you are going to go and look at low-cost countries as well to give you a benefit. Strategy development, this step is where the decision regarding whether and what to negotiate is made. All right, so you have to make that decision at that stage. Then stage 4, pre-procurement market test and market engagement. This step is where supplier conditioning can begin. It may be necessary to engage with some or all of the supplier to gain insight into the market and trends. This is where in the private sector, you would get a budget quote. You engage the suppliers, as many as you can, so that you are fair to everybody, okay? In the center here, there is a system, something that talks about the things that you must consider: e-commerce system, stakeholder engagement, corporate social responsibilities, ethics, security, and so on. Because as you negotiate all around the cycle, you need to take all these into account. Then for the developments of documentation, there is typically limited commercial negotiation activities here, especially in public procurement. You develop these things on your own. However, if it is in private sector procurement, there is quite a bit of negotiation, because you need, especially you have to negotiate with the guys that are providing you those input documents. You need a pricing schedule. So your cost accountant needs to give you time. So you negotiate with them to give this document to you on time. Otherwise, you will not meet your time allocated to have this contract in place. If the lawyers must give you the legal documents and so on, they must provide their input. So although there is limited commercial negotiations, it is more to do with the time of delivery of these documents that you need, that you will negotiate. Then the next stage, there is typically limited commercial negotiation activities at supplier selection to participate in tender stroke negotiation. All right, so that at that point, there is not much that you can negotiate. What this one is saying is that at this stage number 6, you decide whether you're going to go to the open market or you will issue this RFQ to a selected number of suppliers just for negotiation. All right. So what I can see, although it's limited, that decision needs to be negotiated with the other stakeholders as well. Under here, also, there's very little negotiation activities. Under invitation, this is where you issue the invitation to tender. Of course, there's very little that you negotiate. Then when you come to the bid evaluation, this one has got quite a lot of negotiation activities that take place here. Although in the case of public sector, buyers should ensure that they follow appropriate rules. Buyers must make it clear in advance whether there will be post-tender negotiations or not. You cannot negotiate if you did not tell suppliers that they will be subject to negotiation. Otherwise, you award based on the cheapest supplier. All right, so that is a given. The next one is under contract award. Commercial negotiation can take place here in the private sector. More so, value can be extracted at this stage as long as the successful supplier is not informed yet. Why am I saying this? It's because if everybody assumes that they are not the successful supplier at the contract award stage, then everybody will try and provide the best that they can. All right. Then the bid and tender evaluation. Sorry, no, this is the warehouse. I must have missed. Let me just check. Yeah, the delivery of goods and services. This is typically limited. Commercial negotiation activities can take place here. This is the warehousing and logistics where goods are delivered to the warehouse and so on. The only thing that you can do here is mainly expediting, because the contracting has been done and you are not negotiating anything. Suppliers deliver based on the contract that has been signed. Then under contract performance, commercial negotiations activities take place quite a lot under contract performance, because that's why you do the KPIs, which you can negotiate and renegotiate, and then the other discretionary elements may also be negotiated here, depending on what issues are arising from the supplier performance and so on. So you can negotiate the supplier's improvement in terms of performance. If the supplier is not performing well in a particular area, that can become a point of negotiation. Then you go to SRM, Supplier Relationship Management and Development. This is commercial negotiation can take place here, refer to negotiation in relation to the contract management cycle, which we'll talk about just now. This is where much of the negotiation under contracts management cycle will take place. And then finally, the asset management. Ordinarily and smooth transition can be negotiated during the asset management. Now, this is where the contract end comes to the end. It's very important for you to negotiate with the supplier at the exit and the end of the contract, so that they know whether you're giving them an additional month, especially if that supplier has established site. This part is very important for construction projects or for infrastructure related projects where the supplier came in and laid. If you've got a security supplier, for example, they've got CCTV cameras that they have been embedded in your company. They've got network cabling that belongs to them, and those biometric thingies that you put your finger on. If all those have been embedded, you need to negotiate a very good transition. And in fact, for especially ICT type suppliers, you have to have a certain way of overlap between the new contractor and the old contractor. Okay, so that's very important for you to do. And I think you will do this one more in contract management, because this is a very important aspect of contract management that you do with Mulalo, if you haven't done it yet. All right, so now let's go to the next one. As promised, what negotiations take place during contract management? Right, so contract management is a continuous procurement process that ensures suppliers and buyers adhere to their agreed contractual obligations, along with negotiating any future changes that need to take place. Before I continue with this, let me pause here and ask for questions. Do we have any questions, guys? Any comments from your side? How is it going? Let me start with Tumelo, Mr. Lepoto. You are the only one on my screen here.
Hi, Charles.
Hi, Tumelo. Any comments? You are first on my list.
So far, no questions, and I just got in. I don't know why I'm the one on top, but it doesn't matter.
Maybe that's why, because you are probably the last one to join in. All right.
No. So far, no question for me.
All right. Thank you, Tumelo. Let's see who is next. Calvin, Roy. Calvin, any comments? Charles?
No, I don't have any comments now.
All right.
Okay.
Oh, your sound is bad. It's fine, Calvin. I'm going to share my screen again with you. Like I said, I'll leave about 5 minutes towards the end. I'm going to divide you into groups, and I'm going to later on pick a. In fact, you should come back to me and let me know who the team leader is going to be for those groups, and I'll make sure that the groups that are the people that are in today are part, because I think not everybody has joined, so we'll try and sort that one out a bit later. Okay, cool. Let's carry on, guys. So let's go in and just look at the whole contract management cycle and see what kind of negotiations take place. All right. So the contract management cycle looks like this, which you probably are familiar with if you have done contracts management with Mulalo. So it starts with planning, stakeholder, firstly the external environment, the implementation, in fact, and the procurement environment, and then each of the different steps: planning, stakeholder, administration, relationship, performance, and it goes on and on. So let's just look at starting with the planning. It talks about he who fails to plan is planning to fail, according to Winston Churchill. Now, planning and scoping simply means that you are preparing to work smartly, focusing on priorities, resources, risk, considering the success factors, KPIs, and so on. So you will consider the specification and the whole life and cost of the asset you are acquiring, including disposal or maintenance, as well as the transition required to move from contract to contract smoothly at either end. Now, this is something that you have to negotiate with multiple stakeholders. The supplier must be there, the end user must be there. If there is a project manager, they must be there, and of course, you are the leader, the procurement practitioner. The next one is the engagement of different stakeholders. It's important that good working relationships exist between all internal and external stakeholders. Depending on the size of the contract, the external relationship could be quite simple and transactional, or it could be much more involved as you try to ensure a cultural fit. So you can see already the type of negotiation that you will be involved in. You have to negotiate with the different types of relationships that you have across all the stakeholders. As a procurement practitioner, you are the relationship owner. And so you have to sell the vision to everybody to ensure that everybody supports you in executing that procurement project. In different organizations, different job titles will exist, but broadly, the contract holder, the project manager, and finance manager should work together internally. If any of these stakeholders are in contact with the contractor, it's very important to ensure that their actions don't advertently relieve a contractor of an obligation. So be careful when you have other parties that are not procurement practitioners when they're contacting a contractor, because they may say things that will relieve the contractor of his obligation. So those are some of the things that you have to share clear understanding of the main contract points with those stakeholders. The administration part of the contracts management cycle, good contract administration is absolutely fundamental to the success and otherwise of a contract. What is it about? Dates for decision making. The contract administrator is a custodian of dates. They keep dates, they do reports, activities and notices of termination or exit. If it is a job of a contract administrator to notify the supplier that your contract is ending on such a day, please plan your exit. Okay? Any amendments that you are going to do to the contract must be logged and communicated timeously. So if you're modifying the contract, you need to negotiate modification with the supplier. This is part of the contract administration role of a contract administrator. Once a contract has been agreed and signed, the work commences in earnest as is it a schedule of activities and responsibilities which must be adhered to. All right. So this is the job of the contract administrator. Remember, negotiation of dates, key decision made and at what date, the reporting and activities, notices of termination, and so on. All those things are the responsibility of the administration, contract administrator. Relationship management is important. You will need to negotiate any form of disputes, resolve processes and remedies. It should be realized that the skills needed to manage the relationship might be different to those needed to perform or deliver the contract. Now, like I said to you guys, who is the relationship owner? It is principally, it is procurement, unless you have handed it over to a project manager who takes it over, okay? Or a contracts manager, but usually the contract manager is either the project manager or the procurement practitioner who must understand these roles, okay? So that is important. Then performance management. At the outset of the contract, a framework should be in place that includes details of all SLAs, KPIs, and the metrics that you must manage. Those will be negotiated. Processes for problem solving, how do you escalate when there's a problem, or contact points. So when you don't inform the supplier, each party needs to be given a chance to escalate matters. You just don't rush to the lawyers. You must first escalate it internally within the organization. Then you can let the supplier has a choice to either engage their legal practitioners or not. And you need to be very clear, make it clear to your suppliers that the cost of engaging a lawyer is your cost. Put it in a contract. I'm advising you now. Put it in the contract, because if you don't do that, the natural law or common law says that whoever loses a case or whoever is at fault in a particular matter pays for the legal fees and things like that. But you need to be very clear. If your supplier has not used the relevant processes, they escalate, they go to mediation and arbitration to ensure that performance is gotten from you, and they just run to the lawyers, they must pick up the tab for the legal fees. So that's a piece of advice I'm giving you. All right. Just taking a water break. Okay, the next one is a full explanation of liquidated damages. Now, you know, in contract law, they have taught you what liquidated damages are. Liquidated, you know, liquidity talks about cash. It is those damages that are reduced in form of money, okay? Which says that when such a thing happens, such an amount will be paid. You pay, maybe they express it in a percentage value of the contract. Those are liquidated damages. Normally, they are delayed damages, where you say if you delay completion by two weeks or so many days, you pay 0.02% of the contract value. So all those. So a full explanation of how liquidated damages are set against contract breaches or service failure must be explained in the performance of in performance management. Then payment incentives, this is clear. These needs to be negotiated under contracts management. Payment incentives, incentive terms will of course be negotiated as part of the contract, and failure to pay on time, as with any other term in the contract that is not fulfilled, is a breach of contract. Particularly with high value contracts, if time is of the essence with payments, e.g. staged payments in a construction project, and the client is late, this could be considered a material breach of a contract. This is where only one party fails to perform a major part of the contract, which means the non-breaching party is no longer obligated to fulfill the contract. Okay, so the legal position is that this is the same when incentives are built into contracts, e.g. for performance improvement in performance, but furthermore, non-payment in these circumstances could have the opposite effect with the supplier and disincentivize them to improve. Okay, so if you do not have authority to ensure payments are on time, do not negotiate payment terms. Let the one who has authority, if you have, what I mean here is that you can only commit that you're going to pay in 30 days if you know that you have authority to make such a declaration. Normally, most companies, their standard is 30 days, but sometimes you can negotiate a 15-day payment, but you must have the authority to do that. Okay, so involve someone with authority to do so in the contracting process. Then you have risk and resilience. This one is the SIP risk resilience tool is available to you guys. It asks general questions designed to stimulate thinking about the resilience of your organization. In general, this means considering what obligations and remedies you can share with your supplier to mitigate risk. So and this one, risk and resilience negotiation are an ongoing activity. They go into the risk register, and once you believe that you have mitigated that risk sufficiently, you can close it, and that's it. Okay, then contract development stage. During the course of any contract, things will change. So perhaps something in the external environment will change, or in the procurement environment will change, and all those need to be incorporated in the contract. And what you normally do is you add an addendum, and that addendum to the contract must be renegotiated. Okay. Then supply development is, as a minimum, the supplier should deliver the contract you have agreed, but ideally, as they are doing so, you would like the supplier to develop efficiencies that will bring additional benefits to the contract, such as cost savings. Supply development must be a part of the contract that you develop, guys, and you must negotiate specific additional benefits. You must always demand that suppliers you have this supply development aspect. It looks at cost savings and any form of continuous improvement activities. It's a best practice. Then SRM, like I said, we'll talk about it now. SRM helps to create the right relationship and environment in which to work on new developments and evaluate the option of streamlining processes. The ultimate goal is to realize efficiencies which will add value and increase the organization's profitability. Now, having the right relationship with a supplier may be the difference between being first to market with a new concept, or in a difficult supply market, ensuring that you have continuity of supply and reducing your risk. Guys, you have to work at supplier relationship management and negotiate any issues that you might have with suppliers. It will save you a great deal. And then the next, second from last, is exit and termination. Like we said earlier, you cannot think about your exit from a contract too soon in the overall process. What this means is that you need to think about the exit from the onset. You can't say, no, it's too early for me to think about the exit from this contract. No, you have to think about it early enough. Okay, the project should complete on time to budget and all the stakeholders must be satisfied. But at the same time, you need to ensure that you have the right approach on how you will exit and terminate the whole project. Okay. Asset management talks about the management of assets over time. Assets will be carried out. Assessments will be carried out on whether the business requirements have changed and whether the agreement is still required and fit for purpose. This is part of asset management. Do we need this requirement? You can have a 5-year contract, but in the middle of the contract, you decide, okay, this thing is not working. The product that we need to make a change. That is where the concepts of engineering change come in, and you can move into a different cycle. So all those types of negotiations will happen at that stage. Okay, so that is that for the contracting part of the cycle. We've dealt with the requirements for negotiation in the procurement side or the sourcing side, and then the negotiation requirement under contracts management. They are very, very important for you to remember that you will be negotiating in all those. So as we lay this foundation, we'll talk about later on some of the intricacies of the negotiation approach. And sorry about that. And we will engage in terms of each one of these stages so that you understand how you can apply those negotiation principles onto each of those stages. So buyers may see an opportunity to improve their position relative to their competitors. It becomes a need for you to negotiate. Suppliers may see an opportunity also. They will also initiate negotiation. When buyers and suppliers may hold different assumptions or attitudes regarding what should happen at each stage, and mutual benefits may be achieved through negotiation at relevant stages. So these are the reasons for negotiating at different cycles. Okay, now let's talk about the concept of conflict that comes in. This is not conflict of interest. This is divergent views, where you bump heads in the negotiation side. So what are the sources of divergent views? Negotiation is a process by which two parties with divergent positions trade off concessions to reach a mutual agreement. In practice, every relationship that requires mutual understanding must be negotiated. And it doesn't matter what, whether it's a social relationship. If you have to have a mutual understanding, you must negotiate. Unless you are an army general and you are looking at subordinates, there's no requirement for mutual understanding, you just command. But you have to negotiate. And where there is divergent views, there is potential for conflict. There are multiple sources of divergent views that can arise where money is exchanged for goods and services. The tables that follow identify two types of sources that arise from the content or subject matter of the negotiation, and those that arise from the process of the negotiation. And these are the ones. You see on the left-hand side, the sources of divergent positions. It could be price, quality, payment terms, risk sharing, volumes. All these could cause a divergent views. You are going to have a different view on price, on quality, on payment terms, and so on. And all these have to be negotiated, okay? And then if you look at the next one, in terms of the process of negotiation, the agenda and governance of the negotiation are going to be a source for divergent views. Somebody might lack faith in the confidentiality from the other party, and this will raise concerns. The conflict negotiation styles of participants, cultural styles, and so on, those might have a cause for divergent views, okay? All these, remember we talked about content and process. So content we've dealt with, this is the process of time, scale, and location that you may negotiate. And I'll tell you why those are important later on. Negotiation medium, whether it's going to be face-to-face or teleconference, those could cause a conflict. Team size and makeup. If you go with an army of 10 people and the other guy only has 2 people, okay, and you have lawyers, external people involved, that could cause a conflict, and you need to negotiate that. How the negotiation will be closed out, all those are going to be areas that you must deal with, right? Conflict, how do you manage conflict then? Conflict occurs when there are divergent views, like we said. Conflict can be good in different scenarios, and we'll go into details a bit later. It is essential to be aware of the likely source of conflict in commercial negotiation. So these guys called Thomas and Kilman, they designed a conflict resolution model to illustrate the options we have when handling conflicts. And this is how it looks. You can either cooperate when there is a conflict, you can either cooperate, okay, or you can be assertive. Now, your level of cooperation can be uncooperative, or you can be very cooperative, or you could be, if you are assertive, you can be very assertive or unassertive. So, for example, if you become very cooperative and assertive at the same time, then you will collaborate. So the vertical axis, which is this one, is concerned with conflict response in an attempt to get what we want. If I want to be assertive, all right, the horizontal axis is concerned with conflict response in helping others get what they want. If I am very assertive and I cooperate with my colleague, then I collaborate with them. If I'm very assertive, but I do not cooperate with this individual, then I am competing with them. The best approach to all types of conflict resolution is where you are midway with all and you compromise, where everybody takes a bit of it, all right? If you are highly assertive and highly cooperative with whatever they do, you become collaborative. However, you get 100% of what they want. Here, there is a way where you give up something and they also give up something, which is a bit of a compromise, although not always supported within procurement, because we don't go into procurement to compromise. We go in there to collaborate with the other person. You are very assertive and you cooperate with what they need. In human relations, on the other hand, it is I've never seen a relationship where you deal with conflict and you get everything what they want while they get everything they want as well. Normally there is always give and take, and you compromise here and there. You get some, you lose some, and the other person gets some and they lose some. All right, so that's the point. We'll talk about that in detail in the next subject, because I'll show you the different types of negotiation approaches. Compromise is one of them. There's also a collaborative approach, which we'll talk about, which is very interesting. And then we'll talk about one that is a competing approach of negotiation. All right, so let's look at the different styles of you manage. So when you have a conflict, how do you manage those types of conflict? Firstly, you can compete, accommodate, avoid, and compromise. And this is basically what the other one is talking about in the previous one. All right. The other one is talking about the 25 different combinations based on the 4 or 5 elements of conflict response. So you can compete the previous 5 that we talked about: avoid, compete, collaborate, and accommodate and compromise. Different combinations of these. When the supplier is competing and you are competing, there is a huge possibility that this type of conflict is not going to be mutually beneficial, okay? It will not lead to mutual satisfaction. And like you can see, when both buyer and supplier collaborate, they get the maximum out of the conflict resolution process. All right. Both compromises reaches at 19, but it is not the best. Like I said, in human relations, yes, it works like that, where you have the two individuals compromise, but the best way to approach the supplier-buyer negotiation is collaboration from both parts, so that you can make the cake become bigger and you have bigger opportunities. All right. So this is just shows the different ways that you approach the conflict, and it shows you the amount of different possible outcomes of this. The last topic we're going to deal with, and time seems to be running against us, is to do with stakeholders and influences in negotiation. You have dealt with stakeholders before. From this perspective, we are talking about stakeholders in relation to negotiation. Okay, so organizations are made of different stakeholders that you know. In SIPs recognizes three sets of stakeholders. Number one is internal stakeholders, connected, and external stakeholders. Now, there are certain stakeholders that have a contractual relationship with you, and they are not part of your organization. There are certain literatures that bucket them all under one, called external stakeholders. But for SIPs purposes, we've got the three categories, which are different one from the other, because the other ones are connected with you through a commercial and contractual agreement. Now, developing a thorough understanding of your stakeholder is an essential step in negotiation. Okay, you need to take the following step in identifying your stakeholders, understand their needs and expectations, and what the level of influence is of each stakeholder. This is a stakeholder engagement analysis, which you did in the scopes. We went through in the scopes. It shows the level of influence of stakeholders and the level of interest. Depending on how this level of influence and interest is, your approach of managing and engaging them, it becomes different. So for example, if the interest is high and their level of influence is high, you get these guys involved. All right. These are key players who you must get involved. If their interest is low and their influence is low, you can build awareness with them, like communities, for example, send them a newsletter and refer them to the company website. But it's very important for you to know which stakeholders you must keep involved. Like your project sponsor, he is a key player and he must get involved. The next is stakeholders in steps in stakeholder management and engagement, where you identify stakeholders, current levels of commitment, identify the relationship for each stakeholder, and decide how to engage them. Either one-on-one communications, meetings, forums, you can write them letters, and so on. Record actions and provide status updates to some of these stakeholders. Very, very important. So if the stakeholder support procurement team will need to engage with management to ensure that the required support commitment is obtained. This will be achieved through various persuasion and communication techniques. All right. It may be necessary to develop a stakeholder engagement plan to move important stakeholders from being less supportive to more supportive. All right, so that is the end of the lecture. Under team management, when negotiating in teams, we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next course. When you're negotiating in teams, it will be very important for you to understand the roles of every team and understand how the risk profile is going to be spread across the different team members and so on. So it has an advantage, which we talk about later. Sometimes negotiating as an individual is also got some advantages, but we'll talk about that a little later. Desiree is requesting control. Do you want to talk to me, Desiree? Okay, guys, do you have any questions before we go? Any questions? All right, thank you very much. I don't have time to allocate the teams today. What I will do is that I'm going to communicate with the college and they will allocate teams for you. Let me just stop recording. Yeah, they will allocate teams. Each one of you are